The KZ Castor Pro Base Edition has been always in my ears for a month now, with more than 72 hours of total listening time. My main sources are the Arturia Minifuse 1 single-ended and FIO K13 4.4mm balanced connections. I have paired the Castor Pro base with a Dunu SNS ear tips and the CVJ VS400 cable at the up-up-down-down or 1100 configuration. The KZ Castor Pro is an IEM with a resin shell and a metal faceplate, housing two of KZ's ubiquitous 10mm superlinear dynamic drivers. Based on KZ's product photos, the base driver is the closest to the nozzle, while the other driver handles the rest of the frequency from behind. Unlike the KZ Castor Non-Pro, which has its base driver furthest from the nozzle, the Castor Pro has its drivers in a staggered, non-stacked configuration. This time, the Castor Pro sports two 10mm drivers from the 8mm plus 10mm drivers, which are not new superlinear drivers of today, found in the original Castors. This results in a way larger shell and a larger nozzle for the Castor Pros. In a way, this makes these Castors grow. But the superlinear's question is it an upgrade? As expected from KZ, we are provided with basic and awe-detracting packaging and accessories. As much as I try, it is difficult to avoid comparing the Castor and the Castor Pro, given that the Castor Pro is its successor. So, let me list the differences I've noticed in both build and sound to get those out of the way, and perhaps help you guys make a quicker purchase decision. The Castor Pro base, in my opinion, is a faster Castor base. Now, what does that even mean in the context of sound? In the base, the Castor Pro base has very slightly more controlled bass and mid bass. This results in really, very slightly again, less boomier and slightly more thumpier and resolving bass for the Castor Pro versus the OG Castor bass in the up-up-down-down or 1100 configuration. The sub-bass, though not increased, seems to have more presence because of the slightly less boomy and speedier mid-bass response of the Castor Pro. I must say, for the rest of the frequency range, the Castor Pro and Castors are basically the same. But I must say that the upper mid-range is slightly more smooth and less peaky, but still retains the energy that is found in the OG Castors. Now, these observations may be biased due to me knowing better drivers as repeatedly marketed, but the upper treble and air seems to have more detail versus the OG Castors, resulting in slightly sparklier and air and also more presence treble response. But I only noticed these difference when listening to both IEMs side by side and simultaneously, as in left and right. I would have not been able to tell the difference in a blind test or on a random day. But there is one thing that will be the main tell to know the difference: the size and the fit. But first, for the build, except for similar design language from the OG Castors applied to the Pros as well, the size difference would be the biggest deciding factor in your purchase decision. Those who find the OG Castors already big enough or at the edge of being too large, the Castor Pros should not be the IEM you should be eyeing for an upgrade. For those who are deciding on getting either, since the sound difference is really very slight, the deciding factor should be comfort instead. The Castor Pros are really almost too large for my ear canal. I don't mind the shell size, having tried other larger IEMs, but the nozzle size is almost intolerable. Luckily, the Dunu SNS tips have been the most comfortable for my ears, but smaller tips like the TRN T tips are what I prefer more for this IEM. Though, for the sake of consistency in my reviews, I stuck with the Dunu tips. But after this review, I'll be switching instantly, so make sure to tip roll if you are determined to take on this size. Comparing the seal and isolation, both are similar in this regard. with the Castor Pro having more of that filling sensation. But I found the OG Castor to be more comfortable for longer wearing sessions, unlike the Castor Pro, which I could only wear for a medium length of time, around 4 to 5 hours. For those looking for a quick conclusion for the Castor Bass versus the Castor Pro Bass, you can stop watching here, because for the rest of the review, will apply to both, aside from what I've compared before. Finally, the non-comparison sound. The bass. Oh, the bass! It's just glorious! The bass is the Harman style bass that I know and love. I must say that I'm a big bass head with more preference towards the sub bass. But how the Castor Pros present and balance sub bass and mid bass is very flavorful. Every time I listen to bass heavy tracks, my mouth waters. Though, I wish that the Castor Pros were less boomy since it adds too much boominess to the vocals. But it does not mean that it warms, bleeds, or muddies the rest of the frequencies at all. If anything, the transients are fast enough to get out of the way for the other frequencies, yet still maintaining a satisfying heaviness for the mid bass. Every track just sounds so epic, and I consider these to be the best IEMs for movie and show watching, perhaps movie soundtracks. The sub bass and mid bass take their places like a well choreographed dance. When sub bass is needed, the sub bass fills in. When the sub bass is called upon to dominate the portion of the track, the sub bass quickly fills in and leaves with a satisfying and timely decay. The same goes for the mid bass when it comes to instruments, but not so much with vocals because of the effect as mentioned earlier. Every kick, every push, and every pull is fervent. I could feel the bass's texture, the air the bass driver pushes out, and the resolution are leagues above similar priced competitors. I could always follow the notes of bass guitars and sub-bass elements without fail, and never get lost, even when the treble loses its composure. It isn't average. I dare declare that the bass detail retrieval of the Castor Pro bass is one of the best, if not the best, bass presentation in the budget category that I've heard so far. However, there were many times I wished for less boominess, since it made me feel like I was in a cinema instead of a well-treated studio. So, those looking for a studio sound should not look at this set. This set makes me punch the air and feel like I'm above the ground every time the bass booms and rumbles. From a bass head to a bass head, this is it! As expected from a Harman style tuning, the mid-range sounds thin and recessed. Once again, the bass does not muddy, but both the bass and the treble supersede the mid-range, causing pianos, snares, and vocals to sound thin and distant, but overly boomy at times. Because of this, the mid-range detail gets lost in busy portions of the tracks. I found it difficult to focus on instruments located in this region. Despite the capability of the drivers, the Castor Pro bass loses mid-range composure in this regard. However, the upper mid-range is a different story. Still, as expected from a Harman style tuning, the upper mid-range is very energetic and forward, and this energy remains consistent through the upper treble. Though, sometimes I feel like the brilliance and sparkliness eclipse the upper mid. But this does bring out more detail in those frequencies. Cymbals, electronic elements, and vocals sound lively and exciting. The treble micro details that I look for in my most familiar songs are always accentuated. But this does give a thin sound to most of the instruments, especially percussion instruments. I sometimes found this to be unnatural, especially if vocals are alongside snares and cymbals, as they seem to be on the same level of volume. I wish there was a roll-off for the lower and upper treble, but this characteristic does make the Castor Pro bass amazing for low to mid volume listening. For high to max volume, The Castor Pro bass does quite well, but does lose composure around 80% volume as the treble overtakes the mid-range. Thankfully, the bass still provides a hefty amount of weight to give the impression of a balanced sound. Though, as usual for Harman style tunings, I found these to be shouty for my ears, especially at high to max volumes. But unlike other IEMs with similar tunings that I've heard so far, I find these to be less shouty because the treble also has quite a very fast decay, almost akin to a planar. I've listened to many KZ IEMs that have these super linear drivers, and very agile response remains consistent, no matter the tuning. I always have a pricier impression of these drivers, and I believe people are sleeping on what KZ offers and could offer here. But I cannot confidently say that if they truly punch above their price range, just because I have not tried anything above this price point. But there are many people out there that say that KZ IEMs with these drivers could compete above their price range. Again, I shall praise these drivers, but it can be getting old since I would be saying essentially the same thing for every KZ IEM with these drivers. The technicalities are excellent, the soundstage is wide, but with the Castor Pro bass, the soundstage is deeper than it is wider compared to its other same driver counterparts and competitors. Imaging is sharp and precise, layering and separation are good, but could be better in more busy tracks. Sibilance is accentuated, but barely tolerable for me. But the difference in the execution here is that these drivers, specifically for the bass driver, seems to have a more natural resonance and decay. To my ears, the driver seems to push more air than other KZ superlinear drivers, maybe due to some kind of resonance chamber in between the drivers, but this is only a wild speculation. There is some kind of magic going on in the Castor Pro, well, not magic, science, that makes the almost unnaturally agile driver more natural to my ears. Perhaps it's because of the mid-bass, maybe because of the resonance chamber, or is that the fact that the bass driver is closer to the nozzle? Whatever it is, this, for me, is the best implementation of this driver yet, and I hope KZ will be doing whatever has been done here in the future. The KZ Castor Pro Bass Version Edition is one of the most enjoyable IEM in my collection, mainly because, in my opinion, it is one of the best, if not the best, executed budget basshead IEM. I even dare say, one of the best basshead IEM in any price range that I've heard so far. I've heard for a very short time, however, some of Fat Freak's basshead IEM offerings like the Deuce, the Scarlet Mini, the Maestro, and the Grand Maestro. I genuinely believe, with this somewhat unbalanced and unfair comparison, that the Castor Pro bass can trade blows with those. Though, I wouldn't necessarily say that it is better. I also have the Queen of Audio Adonis New in my rotation, and I consider the Castor Pro bass equal to it in terms of bass quality, and the Castor having more bass quantity. This is what I wish the QKZ HBB Hades should have been. Yes, I have that. Now, I don't want to overhype these too much. There are refinements to do for the mid-range and treble, and that's why I can only confidently recommend these to those who only care about the bass and bass only, and a little less confident for those who can perhaps handle or are looking for the quirks that these have, namely the recessed and thin mid-range, the Harman style tuning, the very lively treble that occasionally overpowers the mid-range, and the boomy mid-bass, not to mention the scooped and recessed mids. Then, of course, there is the shell and nozzle size to consider. After all, you can't hear what you can't wear. And all that, and all of that, for around $20. KZ has struck gold with these new drivers, and there seems to be more promising tunings with these drivers coming out from them as well. So we can only expect the better from KZ. Right? Thank you very much for listening to my review, and I hope it was helpful. Please feel free to leave any comments, questions, and feedback for the video. Shout out to mga bases dyan! Now it's time to get out! Mano!